So last week we left off in Exodus 12-ish with the Passover and the death of the firstborn, and we talked about that. With the Passover, we emphasized how it's God that needs to see the blood and not if we feel it there, right? And how our spiritual standing with God has nothing to do with our emotions or with our feelings or that type of stuff, right? We also talked about how all who were without the blood were judged, right? And then in Exodus 12, verse 30, we ended with not a house where there was not one dead. Exodus 12:30. Okay? So this week we're picking up in Exodus 12, verses 31 through 33. Exodus chapter 12, verses 31 through 33 says, "And he being Pharaoh, called for Moses and Aaron by night, and said, Rise up, and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people, that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men." So in verse 33, we have an urgency now. Everybody, not just Pharaoh definitely, but not just Pharaoh, but also the people. They're like, we have had enough. Everybody get out, right? We don't want you here anymore. Get out. The death of the firstborn apparently was enough, right? If we go back to Exodus 11, verse 2, this moment is talked about in Exodus chapter 11, verse 2, and this is the Lord in verse 1 talking to Moses, saying what he's going to do. But in verse 2, the Lord tells Moses to speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor, jewels and silver and jewels of gold, and etc. there, right? And then if we go back to Exodus 12, where we just were, we see this happening in verses 35 through 36. So in chapter 11, they were commanded. They have the whole Passover thing. They have the death of the firstborn. They have all the Egyptians kicking everybody out. And in 12, 35, and 36, they did what they were commanded. And in verse 35, it says, "And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses," which was the word of the Lord. "And they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required. And they spoiled the Egyptians." So now there's an interesting word that's in those two verses. What is that word? No, not lent. Even better. Randy. Spoiled is an interesting word, but that's not the one we're looking for. Wife. Required. Well, okay, why is required an interesting word? They were the slaves. They can't require anything. What requirements do they have? Well, they don't know yet, right? Borrow stuff. They're told to borrow stuff. What stuff? What do I need jewels of gold and jewels of silver and raiment and such things for in the wilderness? God knows. That's right. God knows he's going to build the tabernacle. Very good. Exodus chapter 25. Exodus chapter 25, verses 1 through 8. This is quite a listing of things we have here. Exodus chapter 25, verses 1 through 8. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering. Of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. And this is the offering which ye shall take of them: gold, silver, brass, blue, purple, scarlet, and fine linen, and goat's hair, and ram skins dyed red, and badger skins, and shittim wood, oil for the light, spices for anointing oil, and for sweet incense, onyx stones, and stones to be set in the ephod, and in the breastplate, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." So, as Peter mentioned, this is the offering that the Lord is asking the people to bring for the tabernacle and the priest's garments and those things, right? Where did they get all this stuff from? From the Egyptians, right? And like it was says, the Egyptians were spoiled. Okay, that means they took everything from the Egyptians and took it with them and carried it out, right? So, how would you like to be the Israelites going, can I have that board? And the Egyptians go, sure, right? Because they needed shittim wood. Can I have that fabric? Can I have that badger's skin dyed red? Right? Because it was already dyed red. They didn't do it there. It was already done. Can I have that big roll of fabric? And now you got to carry that out into the wilderness, right? Surely. At this point, I would doubt they were friends, right? I mean, in the beginning, they probably were, because remember, Joseph is the one that saved them. Joseph is the one that saved the country of Egypt and that surrounding area. But now, at least with Moses, at least 80 years have gone by, that they've been in bondage, that they've been in service with rigor, right? And it's at least that. You know it's longer, but it's at least that. So yeah, I don't think they were friends at this point.
No, it's an example that God will never ask us to do anything and not provide.
Right. Right? Is it... Did they ever think that they were going to come out of Egypt with all this stuff? Right? To Mark's point, how quickly God changes circumstances around, both for good and for bad. Right? I mean, you think about Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, right? He's partying up, hand running on the wall. Next day, he's dead. Right? Or Joseph. One day he's in prison. Poof, next day he's second in command of the country and he's married all of a sudden. What? How did all this happen? Right? A lot of times the Christian experience is going along for the ride. Okay? But all these things, the oil, the wood, the badger skins, this is all stuff that they took out of Egypt and took with them, that they had to ask for. Which, as Pastor's been mentioning, on Wednesday nights especially, how do we go to the Lord in prayer? Right? What did the Israelites ask for? Specific things. And then they were granted specific things. Right? The Egyptians didn't come out with a bag full of loot and say, here, take this and go. Right? The Israelites had to ask for it. All right, then back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 41. Exodus chapter 12, verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. All right, so now there's an interesting word there. What word is that? At least it's interesting to me. And then you have to guess it. What's the word? Self-same. What does that mean to you, Peter? Right to the date. Yes, God timed it perfectly, right? God had a date in mind. This is the day everybody's getting out, right? It's not a trickle. Everybody left on that self-same day. And it was a day that was appointed. Right? What does that tell us about how God works? He works in His own time. But there is a time. Right? You think about Revelation. Right? And those things that happen there. There's a time. There's an appointed time that these things are going to happen. And nothing's going to change that time. Peter.
Everything there is a time.
Right. To everything there is a time and a purpose under heaven, right? Okay. So that's the way our God works. What else? So after the 430 years, everybody's getting out of Dodge. Okay. So if you take a look at your handy dandy little handout there, about our maps and routes out of Egypt. Everybody should have one of those. Still? You left yours at home, Darlene? Oh, Darlene. I expect that kind of nonsense out of Shirley. Anybody else need one? I do. I like picking on Shirley. There you go. Anybody else? Jolie, you need one? There you go. Good job. There you go. Since I'm here, you weren't going to admit that you needed one, Mark. All right. But as long as everybody else needs one too. That's nice of you, Mark. Way to step up. Take the hits for Shirley, right? All right. So basically what we have here is over time, there have been projected routes that have been given that the Israelites could have taken when they came out of Egypt, okay? Number one, they show you the dotted lines there, and it's the northern route. And as you can see, down at the bottom is the big lump, that's the Red Sea, and then it forks off into these two gulfs, right? Okay? So the northern route takes you at the top of the Gulf of Suez, which is the fork on the left. There's a little, it's not little, but on the map it's little. There's a little lake-like area, and it goes up and over that little lake. So hopefully you see that. Then there is number two is a middle route, which goes through the Gulf of Suez. Actually, it goes through that other little lake there, which is stupid because you could have gone around it on either side, but they didn't. Number three is the southern route. Why did they do this weird? They numbered it weird, sorry. Number one goes through the little lake. Number two goes through the Gulf of Suez. Number three goes down all the way through the thick part of the Red Sea. And number four goes up over that little lake on top and down through the Gulf of Aqaba. All right? So now if we take a look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 37. So I don't know how they come up with these routes. So I'll just clarify that. These are just the routes that people have thought of over time. So what's interesting is if you look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, it gives us an indication of which way they could have gone. Exodus chapter 12, verse 37 says, "And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men beside children." Okay, so where did they start off? Where did they start off? Ramses, right? That wasn't hard. It's funny that the beginning point, everybody seems to have right. Everybody starts from the same point. It's from there that questions that come up, right? So they started at Ramses. What do we know about Ramses? What is that called? What was that called back then? The land of Goshen, right? That's the land of Goshen. That's where they were. Okay, so they came out of there, and where did they go? Succoth, right? That should be easy to figure out. Where is Succoth? Succoth, unfortunately, is not labeled on this map, because that would have been helpful. But if you look at, okay, you've got the big blob of the Red Sea, you got the left fork with the Gulf of Suez, and then at the top of that, you've got that little lake, right? On the top of that little lake, that's where Succoth is. Okay? So when you see that, you go, well, why would they cut through the lake? Because the city's not in the lake. All right? Why would they go through the Gulf of Suez? Because there's land that they could have gone through there, right? And that's not where Succoth is. Why would you go down, all the way down through the Red Sea like they did? Because what did they do, right? They left Egypt. Well, that land down there in the southern region, that's Egypt. That's not leaving. That's staying there. So after the death of the firstborn, if you were an Israelite, would you like to walk the length of Egypt, right, after all the Egyptian firstborn have just died? No. They're getting out of Dodge, and they got out of Dodge quick, right? So they went through Succoth. So now they have, after that, I've written in number 5, which is a solid pencil, it was pencil, it's a solid line that indicates what would be a more accurate route from what we're told, right? So as you can see, there is the two lines from the number 2 route and the number 3 route, right? That go down towards what they call Mount Sinai. And it just clears the Gulf of Suez, comes right down, and goes to Mount Sinai. Okay? So now, after they come out of Succoth, that pathing is probably right. Because what you have on the other side of that Gulf is a huge mountain range. Okay? So they can't just go wherever they want there. There's a huge mountain range. So you either gotta come down and skirt that mountain range down the side of the Gulf of Suez there, or you've got to go up and over that mountain range. What's up and over in that land past that mountain range if you go up and over? Who's there? The Philistines are there, right? And what do we know about the path they took? What does the Bible say? Exodus chapter 13, verse 17 through 18. Right, exactly. He did not bring, it specifically says, he did not bring them the way of the Philistines. Exodus 13, verses 17 and 18. And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. Right? For God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, of the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. Okay? So, which way did they not go? They didn't go to the north, right? The Bible specifically says that. So they didn't go up over that mountain range, so they had to come down and skirt that side. Now, if you take a look at the pencil line that's drawn in there, you can see that they come down and all of a sudden they take this hard back up to the north and off to the right. Now, if that was flat land, that would look really bizarre, okay? But this map, unfortunately, doesn't show that right where they take that hard bank up and right is a break in the mountain range that people can pass through. And that's what they did. So up to the north you could go over. There's a bank of mountains. There's a break where they cut through. And then the rest of it going down towards the Red Sea is again mountain range. So that's the only place they could have cut through that mountain range into that wilderness area. Peter, you got something?
I have a video at home that shows this pretty well. If I can find it, maybe you can break it down. I don't think it's the patterns of the evidence guy. I think it's something that at home. Basically, where they cross is actually a land bridge under the water.
We're not there yet.
Okay.
Don't get ahead of me. We're not there yet.
Where they're going right here, Pharaoh says they entrapped themselves.
Right. Right. Where they wandered in this wilderness here, because they go up through that mountain range path, and then they kind of trickle down towards the Gulf of Aqaba, right? And what happens is there are trade routes, but then they broke off and they started following in this wilderness, basically dried up riverbeds where they could walk, right? Because this habitation, this isn't great, flat, paved, comfy walking, any of that, right? So they found these dried riverbeds and they were following those. And that's when, like Peter was saying, Pharaoh's noticing this and is like, dude, they're trapped in the land. All we got to do is come up over the top of them. They have nowhere to go, and we got them, right? Even if they go further to the east, to the Gulf, they can't cross a Gulf. We have them, right? So they're totally entangled in the land. What else do we know? So they skirt the west side, cuts through that mountain range. Very good. Exodus chapter 14. Exodus chapter 13, verses 21 through 22. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So what's happening here? God showed them the way. Not only did he show them, he's leading the way. So this whole crazy path that they're going, who are they following? God, right? So, as we look at our lives, have our lives gone in a straight A to B path? Darlene laughs. Right? No. We're all over the place. Right? Why? Well, sometimes it is our own stupidity and we get off track. But other times it's the way God leads us. Do people understand what are going on in our lives? When people look at our lives, they go, yeah, he's got it together. God's ironing out everything for him. Path is smooth. Sailing is great. Right? No obstacles at all. Chuck.
The worst thing is when it's your own stupidity or sin.
Yeah. That's what I meant by stupidity.
God's telling you, the Holy Spirit's convicting you. And then you beat yourself up, which is not necessarily inappropriate.
But Satan's going to grab a hold of that.
When you think you've messed up God's grace towards you in whatever thing, I don't care if it's getting a car or I don't care what it is, the plumbing that keeps not working. But it's all there, and it's not an accident.
Nope.
And we got lessons to learn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They should never fear, but they were afraid, I'm sure, and so would all of us have been.
Oh, yeah.
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 But think about it. You got the light right there. That's God, He's bringing us.
Yeah. And it is amazing how little it takes to get us unfocused. Big pillar right there, following God, and wait, what? Why did they even look behind? Right? But that's what we would do too. You start hearing footsteps behind you and you're like, what's all that about? And you start to panic, right? Peter.
It's even more when you realize that you walk by faith, not by sight, because they saw
Yeah.
every day
Yeah.
the presence of God. Where was the faith? Obviously it wasn't there.
Yeah.
We're just going by sight.
Yeah. So you think, well, if I could just see, to Peter's point, that's not going to be the magic pill to make everything work right for you. Oh, yeah, now my faith. Yeah, now I know. It doesn't work like that, Chuck.
Isn't there a scripture, I know it says God's his reward about Abraham and all that, but he's our rear guard.
Yeah, our rear.
You just brought up, you look behind us and all that. I mean, it's okay to look behind you, look in the rearview mirror in your car, right? But that's not what you meant by that.
That is not what I meant by
You're
that.
thinking about the past and you're thinking about,
Right.
and he's your rear guard.
Well, because that's what Israel did, right? Later on, as we get into them actually wandering through the wilderness, they're like, well, we remember the leeks and the garlic and the onions and all, we were bred to the full and all that stuff when we were in Egypt. Why'd you bring us out here to die by starvation? I was like, well, wait a minute. The slavery, didn't remember that you were crying to God for? And then when he answers your prayer, you're mad? Right? People are funny. Let's see. Exodus. Back to Exodus. Exodus chapter 14, verse 3. Back to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's here saying, for Pharaoh will say, this is why God is leading them. Let's go back. Exodus 14, verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal Zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. Right, so they're over by that gulf now. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. Right, so Pharaoh's thinking to himself, look where they are. That's stupid. Why would you go there? We've got you. You're trapped. Right? Who led them there? God did. This is God's plan. God is telling Moses, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to go there. He's going to think this. They're going to come and you watch. Right? What does that tell us about how the world views what we do? Yeah, stupid. The world's thinking, those people have no idea what in the world they're doing. Right? And oftentimes, that could be true. We don't have an idea of what we're doing other than what God told us to do. We don't know the purpose behind it. We don't know why. But all we know is God told us to do it. So that's where we are. Okay? Verse 4. And I, this is God speaking, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Right? So I am the Lord. He's the one who's leading them. He's the one who's hardening Pharaoh's heart to follow them. He's the one that's controlling Pharaoh's heart and mind to think they're trapped. Aha, we got them. Right? What does that tell us, though? Because there's a difference between what is happening here and what happens later on with the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. Right? What's interesting here is that this has very little to do with the Israelites. The Israelites are just being used. Right? The trials that the Israelites went through to try and to test them and to prove them, as it mentions, that's later. That's not what this is. Right? This is God working on Pharaoh and working on Egypt. Israel is a pawn in this and has nothing. The goal isn't to work on Israel. The goal is Egypt. Right? So what does that tell us about our lives? Right? Sometimes the trials, air quotes, the testing that we think we're going through has nothing to do with us. It's about somebody else. Right? But who's the one that's freaking out? The Israelites are. We are. We're the ones freaking out. It has nothing to do with us. All we have to do is follow the big pillar. Right? And that's what they're doing. That's what their focus should be. Our focus should be following the big pillar. And let God do what he wants to do with all these other things. Right? The people he's working on, the country he's working on, the kingdom he's working on, whatever it is, right? But that's hard for us to see sometimes. Exodus 14, verse 8. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with an high hand. Verse 17. And I, this is God speaking, behold, I, again God, will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will get me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon all his host, and upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. Right? And all the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, and upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. Right? So, who's the focus? Pharaoh and his people. Not just Pharaoh, but Pharaoh and his people. All the Egyptians, they're all going to know. Right? And that's what's happening here. So sometimes the things that we go through, again, have nothing directly to do with us. Right? We're just that little pawn, that piece that God, the bait, if you will, right? That God is using for other honor and glory. Right? Because the things that happen here, through the 10 plagues, through this wiping out of Pharaoh in a little bit here, these things are remembered hundreds of years later when the Ark of the Covenant comes into the camp of Israel and the Philistines go, oh, nuts. This is the God that wiped out the Egyptians. That's years later. They still know that. Peter.
Also goes to the truth that God's not willing that they should perish. I believe some of those Egyptians truly got saved, and we'll see them in heaven one day. They knew he was the Lord, so I don't doubt that some of them got saved.
Sure.
Through all this, just like when God brought them into Babylon.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of the Babylonians got saved.
Sure.
Even the wise men later on probably came because of Daniel and everything he did while he was there.
Well, what's interesting, it says that when Israel went out, it went out a mixed multitude.
Yes.
Right? So that's not just pure Israelites that left. So there were some Egyptians or something else that was there along with them. Chuck?
We know that Moses wrote all this down. And it's, to this day, believers, Israelites, they look at what happened in the Exodus. Right?
Yeah.
This is, and
Well, they do the Passover every year.
Looking for artifacts in the Red Sea and found them and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But how many generations did it take for Egypt, who now knew who the Lord was? I mean, think about it. How many generations of impact did the Exodus have on the Egyptians? And you have later among the prophets God's plans in the end times for the Egyptians. I can't remember just where, but I mean, he cares about them.
He does care about them. What's interesting, you mentioned how the impact, the length of the impact on the Egyptians. They were never a world power after this. And God said so. And spiritual impact?
Yeah. Do you think that, the children at that time, their parents told them what happened? They now knew? Unless their parents lied to them, they probably didn't. Those children told their children, this is what happened. And the God of Israel, He's the Lord. He's the creator of all things.
And well, it's funny that you mentioned that then, because like we just mentioned with the Philistines knew, and that was hundreds of years later, but at some point, something had to have stopped, right? It didn't take that long to forget about who Joseph was, and that was a big deal, right? But if you look at the record now, in Egypt's history, it seems to be, I don't know, where did it go? Did this ever happen? And those kinds of arguments. Even though they have the evidence that they're staring at. We've seen that in some of the videos we've seen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Randy.
You thought you saw something, you knew you saw it, and people tell you over and over and over again, that's not right, that never happened, that never happened. And then you shut your mouth there for a while.
Sure. Well, that's what they're doing with creation, right? That's why we started this whole thing back in Genesis 1, right? Oh, no, it's evolution, which they can't prove. It's still a theory, right? It's not a fact of evolution. Okay? All right. Well, it's not, right? Okay. Where were we going? Let's see. Exodus, we're still in 14. Exodus 14:10. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? This is interesting to me just because of the fact that, okay, so they're camped there, they see the Egyptians, and they're like, that's not supposed to happen, that's a problem, right? They see what's in front of them. They know God led them there because they got the pillar's still right there, but yet, wait a minute, they start thinking, you brought us out here to kill us. So if we go back and we look at the plagues, and then the separation from Israel and Egypt regarding those plagues, could God have wiped out Israel at any time? Yeah. But no, He went through the extra work to do all the plagues, keep you alive, bring you out with all this stuff to then kill you. Right, and we snicker because that sounds stupid, right? But yet that's how we think, right? Why did God drag me? Why did God have me leave this to put me here He's going to kill me, right? This is terrible. Why did God do this to me, right? Is that what God's doing? No, right? Peter, you had your hand up.
Don't believe everything you think.
Yeah.
Because our heart lies to us.
Yes.
But people do believe their own hearts.
Yeah, it is. It's deceitfully wicked, and it's good at it, right? It's good at it. Chuck.
One of my favorite verses in the song, right? Goodness and mercy will follow you, pursue you all the days of your life.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I don't care if you've got cancer and you're on your deathbed and maybe you really are going to die. You've got goodness and mercy pursuing you all the days of your life.
Which is funny because why are you running from goodness and mercy?
Say again?
Why are you running from goodness and mercy?
Yeah.
If it's pursuing you, that means it's chasing you. Why are you running? Right? Okay, so what's interesting then in 13 and 14, chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. So Moses has faith here. Moses is like, look, I know the plan. This is what God said was going to happen. Just watch. Hold on and watch. Verse 15, And the Lord said unto Moses, Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the people of Israel that they go forward. How? There is no forward. So what's interesting is where they are. If you look on your map again, they're at the Gulf of Aqaba, right? This is where God's had them land. And right before they cross this gulf, again, there's mountains and land formation stuff that's in the way there, right? So they've been kind of funneled into this place, which is why, again, Pharaoh says that they're entangled in the land. You know, it's like the typical Western movie when there's, cliff, and you're walking through the middle and you're going, this is good, right? But at the end of it, it opens up to this big beach area where they think they actually did the crossing, right? Where it's the only spot on this Gulf side that it has any type of flat area large enough for this amount of people, okay? So that's where they're encamped. So they're forward. They only have two directions. Forward is water. Backwards is Egyptians. So they're going, go forward. I don't know how to swim, God. You got to help me with this, right? In verses 19 through 20, Exodus 14, 19 through 20, And the angel of God which went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came to pass between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them, the Egyptians, but it gave light by night to these, the Israelites, so that one came not near the other all the night. So now this is interesting. So you've got this pillar that goes from leading them to now behind them in the way, blocking the path of the Egyptians to them. It's darkness to one, and it's light to the other. Right? What do we see when we look at God? Light. What does the world see when they look at God? Do they even see it? No. Because the God of this world has blinded their eyes. Interesting. Right? So God camps there all night. And goes, go ahead, guys, you can get some sleep. Tomorrow we're crossing. Right? So how do you sleep with fear Israel? And they're right there. And the only thing separating you from them is God. In theory, that's where we are, right? That should give us tremendous peace. Like Chuck said, he protects your back, right? That's what's happening there. But in reality, is that how we live our lives? We like to have plan B, plan C. If God doesn't, and then I can, and then, but God will. But if he doesn't, just in case, then we plan and scheme and twist and, right? But what does God want us to do? What did God tell them to do? Go forward. Yeah. Gave them a plan, expects them to follow it, right? Go forward. He was there all night. In verse 22, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. So if we look at 21, that's where Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and there was the wind, and the wind blew all night, and it had the water go up. So it's not like in the movie where Moses, and then it took a little time, right? Okay. But there's a difference there between Israel's point of view and the Egyptian point of view, the world point of view, right? The Egyptians saw darkness in verse 20 of chapter 14. In 24 and 25, again, we have the Egyptian point of view. We'll start in 23. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his horsemen. So this is interesting. Remember, we had the pillar of fire and of the cloud, the darkness to the one side, right, separating Egypt and Israel. Israel goes across. What happens? How did Egypt get from where they were to the Red Sea? What had to happen? God had to move. God had to let them through, right? So God steps aside and says, okay, Egyptians, your turn, right? Now, if you're Israel, do you like being chased again? No, we don't. We don't like being chased. We don't like problems coming after us again, right? But that's what happened. And who let it through? God did. Why? Because who's the focus again? The focus is on the Egyptians, not Israel. Okay? 24 through 25, that's where we were. Okay, so they're going through. And it came to pass in the morning watch, the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that Egypt said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. Right? And there's been videos on the chariot wheels and axles that they've found in this Red Sea area here in the Gulf of Aqaba, right? Why? So who dismantled the chariots of the Egyptians? God did. Okay? Verse 28. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. Right? This is similar to the flies. This is similar to the locusts. You've got an army, or what's left of the army of the Egyptians, following after you. They're going over the same ground that you just went over. God goes, bring the water back. So Moses does. And they all die. Right? None of them are left. Okay? Apparently no Egyptians know how to swim. I don't know. Right? But who's in control of life? Nobody knows. Who's in control of life? God is. Thank you, Shirley. Right? Who's in control of all this stuff? What's interesting then is then they see in verse 28 the bodies of the Egyptians, all dead corpses, right? But what did they do? Think about what they did there. What did the Egyptians have on them? Huh? Armor, weaponry. Why is that important, Peter? Well, it does make it hard to swim, doesn't it? Right? But when that washes up on shore, what do the Israelites do? You don't explicitly see it here, but think about what happened. What did they do? Randy? Yeah, they went to an estate sale. That's right. They took all the weapons and stuff and the armor and stuff. Why is that important? Nobody knows why that's important. No. There's a battle ahead. What happens right after this? Right after this is the battle with Amalek. Right? And the Amalekites. What happens in a battle if you don't have a weapon? Mark, what happens? Yeah, you get defeated, right? Okay. So again, who's providing? The Lord is. In a very, bizarre way, right? You think about it, well, why didn't God just give me armor for Christmas? You know? Why the whole big, why the show? Why the hard? Why couldn't you have just done it the easy way, God? Right? Who gets the honor and glory for it? God does. Right? What should that do? Build the faith. And encourage their heart. Right? After this, they're singing. But shortly after this, in 16 and 17, they're complaining. You brought us out here to die again. Well, if he wanted to kill you, he would have done it there. Or before. Or just put all of you in the Red Sea and said, be done with all of you. Right? So while God is working on one party, he often uses us as in that mixture. I don't know how else to put that. Sometimes you're bait, or sometimes you feel like bait, right? Other times you're just the pawn and you're just out there doing what you're supposed to do, and it affects these other things. And God uses small things to confound the world, like Christians. Right? Yes, it was judgment on Pharaoh and his people, just like he told Abraham back in chapter of Genesis, right? The promise that he gave. So all these hundreds of years earlier, God's calling his shots, going, this is what I'm going to do. And we're like, wait a minute, you can't do that. This is hard. It's not about you, right? It's not about you. And with that, we'll conclude our epic adventure through God's Word today.